So I was playing around the other night, just really needing to sit down and work with some color and some various things like that, and started working with probably one of the easiest ways or techniques to start working with polymer clay, and that is to create a veneer and then uh, cut out those pieces into jewelry components. These are all earring components, and then work from there. So this is what I ended up making the other night. So this is really basically the veneer that I came up with. And then, we've got some earring components that could go with the earrings with the bottoms. It could be mix and match. We could do squares here, or we could do circles here, different things like that. But really using four colors, a four-color scheme, five with the tinted white, because I didn't go with a pure white for the background. So let me show you what I used. A lot of times I just, you know, I'm a big Pinterest person, and so love to go out there and look at different color boards. And the Southwest Canyonland is just near and dear to my heart. I grew up in Denver, Colorado, but had relatives down in Arizona, down by the Grand Canyon. And my grandfather was a painter, and he painted almost all of the canyons in Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico. So I'm really attracted to that southwestern kind of color palette. And it just so happens that the Pantone Fall 2020 colors have quite a few quite a few of these colors in them. So there's an artist called Chris, Crafts by Chris, and she's been doing color recipes for a long time. And so I usually buy her recipes. It's like $5 per season, um, and use her recipes to get to the colors that I really like. And again, remember, your printer is going to print off colors differently than what the actual might be. So this is really light. If you would look at this photograph on your monitor, it'd be much deeper colors here, and I could have taken it into Photoshop and matched it up, but I just printed it just so that I would remember that these were the colors that I wanted to work with. So, if I start off with Amber Glow as maybe the base color for this one, and I did end up lightening it a little bit with white. And then there's this military olive that I used as the base for the green. And again, I added white to it to bring it out. Oh, and this one, um, when I first mixed it, it was too yellow. It was too bright. So I had to cool it down. I added just a little bit of cadmium blue in there, and it came out really nicely. And then with the gray, I started out with this sleet gray and lightened it to where I wanted it as well. So I'm really using these four colors, and then the base, they had white here, but I really sort of wanted a creamier color. So I just mixed in a little bit, very little bit of the amber glow with the white to get that base color. So that's how I came up with these colors and this palette. Okay, and I wasn't even thinking about that. I should have recorded it while I was doing it, or at least saved some of the veneer so that you could see how I did that. But I'll demonstrate just a little bit how to make this kind of a veneer. Really easy, really easy. So to get the textures in polymer clay, you can use different tools to make textures, or you can get texture plates. You can use textured scrapbook paper, anything that's going to put a texture on anything, like even the plastic that I use to keep my my glass table in place could put a texture on polymer clay. So that's the nice thing about polymer clay, is that you can texture it, and as long as you're not pressing down on it or anything after you texture it, it will maintain that texture really nicely. So for this texture here, let me zoom in a little bit so you can see it. And you can see the texture nicely. I used this texture plate here. It's not very deep. For some polymer clay, in another technique that I'll show you, the texture needs to be a lot deeper than this, but I just wanted to do a surface texture, so this one was fine. I liked this design, but I also wanted to get some of this interest in there as well, so you can see how I did that and how I got that texture, and then also these pieces up here. Then what I did with some of the pieces is I took the texture and then I used pan pastels and just lightly dusted on the top, skimmed along the top, and that really helps reveal the texture. So you don't have to do that. You can leave it plain like this one. But I kind of like this look where the texture is really revealed. So the only problem with that is that you've got to use a contrasting color to really get the texture, but it can change the color of the clay. So you'd have to think about it, you know. I mean, I used this light green, and then I put on a silver with a little bit of rust on there, and I feel like that really changed the color of this component. Not sure if it matches. You know, maybe it does. Maybe I was just being too critical the other night when I was doing this. You know, I sort of like this where you have a strong contrast between the colors. And I did this so that I could put these two components together. Let me zoom in on those so you can see. I guess that's about as focused as it's going to get. So, you know, I think that one turned out okay, but I would just be cautious with using any kind of alternate color. It just takes playing around. But once you put the pan pastels on the pieces, they're done. So if you didn't like it, you know, you could do some test pieces on some small scraps of the color, or just make more earring components. You know, that's just the way it is. The nice thing about polymer clay is that it's not so extremely expensive. That if you mess up some things, you don't feel like you're throwing away dollars, you know, a fortune's worth of material. So, like I said, I wish I would have thought to record or at least taken a picture of the veneer when I was done. But what I'll do is I'm just going to make a small piece and show you how I did it. So I had some scraps of this that still had some color in it, and I'm not too worried about that because with all the colors in there it should balance out. See, and I get cat hair, actually it's dog hair in your clay, then it gets baked in there and you don't want that. So anyway, so it maybe came out a little bit darker in value, but the tone is still the same, so I feel like I can use it. So let me mix this back in. And remember when I talked about the air bubbles, I've got a little bit of an air bubble in there, so I'm just going to take it and just kind of slash through that and then heal the clay to make sure that I don't bake those in there, because then it looks like you've got a big bump. Let me do this one more time. All right, so this isn't a very big piece of clay. I rolled it out on my number 3, and that should be fine. These I rolled out on a number 2 or maybe a number 1 because I knew I was going to be pressing into it, which would make it a little bit thinner. And I like my earring components. I might put a backing on this. If you'll notice on here that this earring component is much thinner. This earring component is much thinner because this is what I'm going to put a post onto the back of it. And I can glue the post, but they have a tendency to come off, if you use like a super glue, Loctite super glue. And so I glue it on, but then I also put another piece of raw polymer clay on there and bake it again with just the post sticking up out of it to make sure that it's secure. So I want these to be equal, so I know that I'll do a much thinner piece and put that on the back of this part so that they come out equal. But it still is a little bit flexible, but it's not going to break apart. If you make your earring components too thin, then there's a tendency for them to break apart. And if you're selling jewelry, you don't want your customers to come back and say, this broke apart. So between curing at the right temperature and for long enough and using the right thickness, that's important. Okay, enough of going down that rabbit hole. So taking the photograph again and the color palette that I found that I really want to work off of, that I created these components, I took the Amber Glow. So I took the Amber Glow, made this recipe, and knew that although it was gorgeous, I did want to start out a little bit lighter. So I added white, quite a bit of white to bring this down, but then even at that, it was too bright. It was too yellow. So I added just a little bit of blue to it to just cool it down a little bit, and that came out really nice. I liked how that was. And remember, this printout is much lighter than the actual colors I was seeing on my monitor. I did decide to go ahead and use the Amber Glow rather than going with a more tan color in here, but I did take the Military Olive and I lightened it up. I could have maybe gone a little bit lighter, but I kind of like that. And then I took the Sleet Gray and lightened it up quite a bit as well. This is where I started, and I lightened it up. And then again, for this color, instead of using a pure white, I mixed some of the Amber Glow in with it to come up with more of a cream color. So get this ready. So here's the cream color that I mixed from all of my scraps. It still is a good tone, a little darker value, but not noticeably. All right, so I took just little tiny pieces of, you don't have to use very much clay, so just little tiny pieces of the clay, rolled it into a ball, and then just started rolling out snakes. We call them snakes, just little snakes. So if you just keep rolling out and kind of keep moving out to the side, you can control fairly well how thin or how thick you want it to be. So I did snakes for each of the colors here. That's the Amber Glow. And, maybe even within the same color, do a couple of different thicknesses. Here's the gray. Here's that lighter Amber Glow. And then here is the green. All right. So there's my palette. Then I'm just going to take either an X-Acto knife or my blade, my tissue blade that I use to cut my polymer. Probably for the detailed work that I'm going to be doing here, I'm just going to use an X-Acto knife. And basically what I'm going to do is just take little, very small, 1 millimeter pieces and just start laying it out. Sometimes I try to find a shortcut to get this going a little bit better. I'm just pressing it onto the clay. I'm not flattening or doing anything right now. You know, if you wanted to, you could roll it into a little ball and put it on there. So it's probably enough green just to demonstrate what I'm doing. Then I take the next color and the very same thing. You know, this one, if I want it to spread out a little bit more, I might cut a little bit larger piece. And pretty much once you've stuck it on there, you know, when it just drops on, I can still move it, but once I stuck it on there, it's stuck. You don't want to get too detailed about it, but, you know, still say, okay, where do I want to place that? And then we'll do the gray. And then we'll do a little bit of this lighter or the darker amber glow. So this is going to be a little bit more time intensive than some of the other techniques, but to me it's almost meditative, I guess, to just be working with detail like this. A couple more pieces of green. And you don't have to get your pieces this close. I just wanted them a little bit closer than others. You know, some people like fill the whole thing with different colors. So it's just up to you. I would just play around. And then I need to flatten this because I don't want it to be bumpy like this. I mean, that's a technique. You could just leave it like this and let it be bumpy and get some texture that way. But I want it to be smooth. You know, these are fairly smooth, so I want it to be smooth. So what I'm going to do is take a piece of either parchment paper. You can cut parchment paper into small pieces, or the the food wrap pieces that I was showing you. This light food wrap. Where's my parchment paper? So another thing that I do is I go to you know, a food supply place, and these are actually patty sheets. You know, they put the hamburgers on here, or meat to separate. So when you freeze it, there's something in between it. So you can also use this. And parchment paper is really nice because the clay will stick, but then also when you're ready to peel it off, it peels nicely off of the parchment paper. You can also bake on the parchment paper if you want to. I would not bake on the plastic wrap. So I'm going to keep this on the glass, and I'm going to cover it with the parchment paper. And then I just take a piece of, this is cardstock, a little bit heavier cardstock, and we call it a burnisher. And I'm just going to gently just press down, going around in circles. And what I'm doing, I'm flattening those little round balls onto the clay, and I want it to be as smooth as possible. So once I get it here, I might feel I've still got a few bumps, so I might press a little bit harder. But you want to keep your thickness of your veneer the same, so don't like press down in. Make sure that when you're pressing, you're going back and forth like this. All right, and then it just peels right off of the parchment paper, and you've got this nice veneer. And then we have all sorts of different kinds of cutters that you can use to, cut shapes and different things like that. These are fairly small. I've got some larger cutters that I could use. This would cut out um, sort of a hoop kind of thing, plus a centerpiece that you could use. I have a 3D printer, so I've been 3D printing some of these cutters, as well as like these are leather cutting pieces, so you can use them as well. And then, small cookie cutters, whatever it might be. So I'm going to use this small cookie cutter, and I just want to get a little bit, and I can just cut into this, just press down, and it comes out really nice and cleanly. The 3D cutting ones need a little bit of cleanup after that, but you'll see how cleanly that comes off. I don't have to do much touch up to that one. And to pull it up off of the glass, you use your tissue blade, because if you try to pull it up with just your fingers, you're going to stretch your shape out of shape. All right, and I can just do a little bit of cleanup there. And then I could do a bottom component, so I could either do a larger oval like this, or maybe I want to do, let me see what I've got here. Yeah, see, I could do a larger oval like that. And I've got some interest here. I hate it when I get the little fibers in there, because boy do they show up in the clay. I might be able to sand those out. And so you just kind of look in there and say, okay, where do I want? I kind of like, if we're going with the rule of thirds, maybe something like that would be really nice. Now, another thing that you can do is, if you want a little bit more rounded edge or domed edge than this provides, you can put a piece of the plastic, or really light kind of plastic, on the clay, and then position your cutter and press down. And that plastic will, because you're forcing it down, it'll produce a little bit of a dome. So can you see the difference? You may not be able to. So this is a little bit more rounded than this one. Works better when the clay is much thicker than what I've got it at right now. Okay. Anyway, so that's how I did that veneer, and then cut it into the pieces to come up with these pieces. Really easy veneer.